All right, so in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we have seen a pretty massive crackdown on the information ecosystem and the media more generally. We've seen this happening in Russia, we've seen it happening in Ukraine, and we've also unfortunately seen it happen here in the United States, where entire outlets like RT America, which is primarily what I'm going to talk about today, have essentially been wiped from existence, at least from the perspective of the American people. And so Chris Hedges, who is a fantastic author and journalist, was the latest victim in this entire crackdown, and he basically wrote a little article here for Common Dreams and explains why he thinks that this is unjustified and damaging for society in general to be having these types of crackdowns. So I wanted to read to you what he said, because I think he made a lot of good points in this. So here from his article that he wrote: Chris Hedges digitally disappeared. YouTube has deleted 6 years of his show. So not only did they ban him from making content via RT America or via his show here, but they also just straight up deleted the entire archive of all of the shows that he has done previously, even ones that have absolutely nothing to do with Russia directly or with Vladimir Putin directly or anything having to do with, connections to the ongoing invasion of Ukraine. And so he starts here by saying, the entire archive of On Contact, the Emmy-nominated show I hosted for 6 years for RT America and RT International, has been disappeared from YouTube. Gone is the interview with Nathaniel Philbrick on his book on George Washington. Gone is the discussion with Kai Bird on his biography of J. Robert Oppenheimer. Gone is my exploration with Professor Sam Sloat from Trinity College, Dublin, of James Joyce's Ulysses. Gone is the show with Benjamin Moser and his biography of Susan Sontag. Gone is the show with Stephen Kinzer on his book on John Foster Dulles and Alan Dulles. Gone are the interviews with the social critics Cornel West, Tariq Ali, Noam Chomsky, Gerald Horne, Wendy Brown, Paul Street, Gabriel Rockwell, Naomi Wolf, and Slavoj Žižek. Gone are the interviews with the novelist Russell Banks and Salar Abdo. Gone is the interview with Kevin Sharp, a former federal judge, on the case of Leonard Peltier. Gone are the interviews with economist David Harvey and Richard Wolff. Gone are the interviews with the combat veterans and West Point graduates Danny Scherzen and Eric Edstrom about our wars in the Middle East. Gone are the discussions with the journalists Glenn Greenwald and Matt Taibbi, and gone are the voices of those who are being prosecuted and marginalized, including the human rights attorney Stephen Donziger and the political prisoner Mumia Abu Jamal. None of the shows I did on mass incarceration, where I interviewed those released from our prisons, are any longer on YouTube. Gone are the shows with the cartoonists Joe Sacco and Dwayne Booth, melted into thin air, leaving not a rack behind. And so listen, the reason why I went through that entire list and read out all of those names is because you can see there's people like Cornel West and Noam Chomsky and Slavoj Žižek and all of these other people who have nothing to do with Putin or Ukraine or the ongoing invasion, and they're just interviews and documentary pieces and shows that he has done where they explore topics that have to do with things like the Iraq War or criticizing US imperialism or any number of other things, the US criminal justice system, etc. So all of these different things that have nothing to fucking do with the ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine. And so what would be the justification? What could possibly be the justification, even from somebody who thinks that, anytime that Chris Hedges comes and speaks about Russia, that he's just towing the line for Vladimir Putin? Even if you thought that, then what do all of these other interviews on all of these other topics have anything to do with that? They shouldn't be removed. That should be information that should be accessible to people. It's just completely, even if you accept the faulty premise that Chris Hedges is just a pure Putin propagandist, even if you accepted that premise, it wouldn't make sense to completely remove all of these different valuable interviews with really important, famous people that, are Americans in many instances and have nothing to do with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So it's just, again, this massive, massive list that's just this archive that's been completely wiped from existence and is no longer accessible on the main platform on YouTube, where people go to watch shit like this and to try to get access to different information. I mean, it's such a massive loss, you can't even begin to think about it. And also, again, it doesn't even make sense from not only the perspective of if you believe that Chris Hedges is a Putin propagandist, but also he's just not. I mean, he has been critical of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. He called it an unjustifiable war of aggression. So he's not even towing the line. He's not going out there and calling it a special military operation and repeating everything that Vladimir Putin is saying. He's not doing that. So your criticism, if that's what it is just based on faulty premises. And also, even if you accept those faulty premises, is way overbroad in targeting all of these other, topics that he has been covering over his career. But he continues saying, are we more informed and better and a better society because of this wholesale censorship? Is this a world we want to inhabit, where those who know everything about us and about whom we know nothing can instantly erase us? If this happens to me, it can happen to you, to any critic anywhere who challenges the dominant narrative, and that is where we are headed as the ruling elites refuse to respond to the disenfranchisement and suffering of the working class, opting not for social and political change or the curbing of the rapacious power and obscene wealth of our oligarchic rulers, but instead imposing iron control over information, as if that will solve the mounting social unrest and vast political and social divides. So again, I can't speak like Chris Hedges does. He's obviously very elegant in the way that he describes these things, but essentially in a reductive way, what he's describing here is just this societal trend that we've seen very consistently, where in especially capitalist societies, when you start to have this denigration over time of, working people becoming more alienated from their labor, being more exploited, and having their jobs shipped overseas and getting fucked over from every single angle by the capitalist system, and you don't have a political class that is responsive to their material, their economic needs and interests, then this is the type of shit that they're going to do in place of that, because you are going to have growing unrest. You are going to have people who are deciding to say, this system is not working for me, and so maybe we need to aggressively try something else. And so if your response to that is not going to be addressing their material needs, the alternative response that they always tend to go to is cracking down and becoming more fascistic in how they are governing. And we've seen that happen recently, and this is just, part of that ongoing narrative. But he continues here saying, what were my sins? I did not, like my former employer, the New York Times, sell you the lie of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, peddle conspiracy theories about Donald Trump being a Russian asset, put out a 10-part podcast called The Caliphate that was a hoax, or tell you that the information on Hunter Biden's laptop was disinformation. I did not prophesize Joe Biden was the next FDR or that Hillary Clinton was going to win the election. So essentially just calling out, the rampant misinformation that we've seen from mainstream outlets and still see to this day. I mean, how are you going to, ban RT America or financially pressure them out of existence for, I guess the idea that they represent Vladimir Putin abstractly, or they represent Russia's interest abstractly? But even the people you're talking about in question, like Chris Hedges here, are against Vladimir Putin's actions. He's against the invasion. So, if you're going to crack down on all of RT America for being loosely associated with the crimes of Vladimir Putin, then you would have to completely dismantle the New York Times, ABC, NBC, Fox News, CNN, all of these other different mainstream outlets that are considered perfect in every way, that never get anything wrong. You would have to completely dismantle all of those different things. You would have to completely dismantle and essentially ban all of those different media corporations who were towing the line for George W. Bush and basically creating the conditions and propagandizing the American people and manufacturing consent to get people to believe that that was a justifiable war. And that war led to, not to do comparisons here, because what's happening in Ukraine is obviously a tragedy and a horrible, situation, but the war in Iraq caused hundreds of thousands of deaths. I mean, we have the blood of hundreds of thousands of innocent men, women, and children on our hands via that invasion. So how are you going to hold RT America accountable broadly and entirely with removing the entirety of his, archive here? You're going to hold them entirely accountable for the actions of Vladimir Putin, even though they're critical of Putin, but then you don't have that same standard for U.S. journalists who were not critical of George W. Bush and the criminal invasion of Iraq. It's just a complete glaring double standard that they have here, and it's obvious and it's right in your face. But again, these same outlets that lied about the war in Iraq and peddled conspiracy theories about all these other things that he's talking about here, they get elevated, they get brought up to the surface and are shoved in people's faces in the mainstream media because of their willingness to lie about these things, because of their proximity to power within government circles. So again, it's just this feedback loop that he's talking about here. But he continues saying, this censorship is about supporting what, as IF Stone reminded us, governments always do, lie, challenge the official lie as I often did, and you will soon become a non-person on digital media. Julian Assange and Edward Snowden exposed the truth about the criminal inner workings of power. Look where they are now. This censorship is one step removed from Joseph Stalin's whitewashing of non-persons such as Leon Trotsky out of official photographs. It is a destruction of our collective memory. It removes those moments in the media and the press where we attempted to examine our reality in ways the ruling class did not appreciate. The goal is to foster historical amnesia. If we don't know what happened in the past, we cannot make sense of the present. And I think that's really the most powerful thing of what he just said here, because listen, again, it's his entire archive. You didn't just go in and like in a very nuanced way say, okay, I think this specific video that Chris Hedges worked on, that this was Russian propaganda and that it's dangerous or whatever the fuck the justification is in that moment. It's not like they went video by video and, took out different specific pieces and said, we're going to give you a detailed explanation as to why we think we're removing this video. No, they just completely got rid of the entire archive of all of the videos that he did. So it's just completely overbroad, even if you think that RT America is just pure Putin propaganda, even though, again, they're not. And he's not the only person who works at RT America who's done fantastic work that has now been completely removed from existence on outlets like YouTube. So just as a reminder here, Abby Martin, again, fantastic journalist that's done great work over years and years and years, standing up for Palestinian rights and so many other things. But she had basically a similar experience to Chris Hedges here. And she said, YouTube just banned almost 600 episodes of my old show, Breaking the Set. Years-long censorship campaign culminated in tech giants purging thousands of my critical interviews and reports about U.S. empire. So again, they're all fucking gone from YouTube. You can't even access these older things that weren't even about Russia or Ukraine or Vladimir Putin or anything having to do about that. And that is trying to erase. It's trying to erase history. It's trying to erase the people who did the best jobs, the most extensive journalistic work in exposing the crimes of the U.S. empire and exposing all of these other different stories that now people just don't have access to. It's so fucking damaging. But she continues saying, in 2017, U.S. Director of National Intelligence said Breaking the Set promoted radical discontent for covering things like socialism and third parties, and the government campaign to censor forbidden viewpoints started then and won't stop until we're all gone. Knowing this was coming still doesn't prepare you for the loss. Wasn't able to get the full archive. The channel hosted a community with a time capsule of comments and embeds in countless articles that are now dead. A chunk of the historical record removed in the blink of an eye, and she says that she is trying to put together an archive of all of these different things. So I'll link down both of these threads in the description if you want to go and check that out for yourself. But again, just absolute like destructive losses. And again, from somebody who, similar to Chris Hedges, isn't even in favor of the current Russian invasion into Ukraine, but also like somebody like Abby Martin, she wasn't even in favor of Russia's incursion, I guess you could call it an incursion, into Crimea and annexing it. So it's like throughout consistently for years now, it's not like they've been doing purely pro-Putin propaganda throughout this entire time. That's just not the case. These are people who have been critical of Putin, who have been critical of the actions of the government of Russia. So again, it's just, not only is it destructive in a historical sense and in a media sense, because now people don't have access to all of the great work that they've done over the years. Not only is it destructive in that capacity, not only is it, completely a massive double standard because you aren't holding U.S. corporate media outlets to the same standard as RT America is being held. But I mean, it really just doesn't make sense from any perspective, even if you accept the line that RT America is just pure 100% unfiltered Putin apologia or Putin propaganda. Even if you accepted that line, well, I still think that people should be able to look at what the views of Vladimir Putin are. We should be able to look at what the views coming from the official Russian outlets actually are, so that we can understand at least what their perspective is, okay? You don't have to accept it, you don't have to believe it, but for the same reason that I would want to hear what Vladimir Putin's opinions are right now, for obvious reasons, because there's an ongoing war and you need to be able to do that analysis and understand where they're coming from if anything productive is going to be done on the diplomatic front. So it's like, I would want to hear from Vladimir Putin in the same way that I would want to hear like what the fuck Donald Trump has to say right now, even if 100% of it is just bullshit lies. It's about him being the potential next president of the United States. So we should be able to have access to the types of things that he's talking about, to the types of things that is going on in his brain, or else how are we supposed to hold anybody accountable? How are we supposed to have any of these, inner working dialogues and communications? It's not going to be possible. So In a net sense, I think it's obviously a bad thing that we have seen this crackdown. And again, it's not just in the US, it's in Russia, it's in Ukraine, it's also here in the United States to a slightly lesser degree. But nonetheless, this type of shit absolutely has to stop. It's ridiculous and, over jumping the gun in terms of trying to control the spread of misinformation or whatever you want to call it. And in the meantime, you are completely gutting the work of plenty of amazing journalists who have been exposing the crimes of the US empire and even the Russian empire for years now.